Morning, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome back to the live session number 3. A language poll has been launched, so please indicate whether or not you would like to, whether you prefer to speak in English or French, or listen in English or French. Donc, un sondage est présentement être transmis. S'il vous plaît, veuillez noter si vous voulez être vous voulez participer en français ou en anglais. Good to have you all back. I myself am just back from Rwanda late yesterday on Thursday, late afternoon. Had a very interesting visit with the Rwandan parliament that I'd like to share with you because it's definitely relevant to what we're talking about today. I was doing training for actually all members of parliament. We had 3 days of training, and we met with 1/3 of the MPs every day. So we rotated one day, one day, and we were talking about their role, the role of sectoral committees in reviewing performance audits, which is actually next week's topic. So I won't get too much into that issue. But what was interesting was that we had a conversation because these are newly elected members. There was a lot of newly elected members of parliament. The election just took place, I believe, a few months ago. So because of that, before you start talking about performance audit or any kind of very specific topic like that, it's very important to situate that within the entire budget cycle. And we've had this is what this is all about. Our modules are all about different phases of the budget cycle. So before talking about the audit phase, I tried to sort of set a picture of the entire budget cycle. And we talked about the approval phase. And one of the days we had the chair of the budget committee. Actually, it was on Wednesday. We had the chair of the budget committee who participated in the meeting, and she advised that when it comes to approving the budget, the parliament has approximately 2 weeks in June. According to the budget calendar, to review the budget and to scrutinize the budget and to approve it. 2 weeks. It's not a lot. And I believe when I was in Malawi, I think I told you this before, the situation was very similar. So in Rwanda, they are reviewing the budget framework paper, which is the budget policy statement or pre-budget statement, which takes us back to the formulation phase of the budget. So at least they're getting some discussion taking place before the budget is actually tabled in Parliament. There is some pre-budget scrutiny going on. But today we're going to talk about the role of Parliament in the approval phase and the role of civil society organizations. And so this is the reason I thought I would start by sharing this information with you, because obviously 2 weeks is not a lot for a Parliament to review the budget. And I think my friend Adams Fusheni, who's joining us as a resource on these at the live sessions, has I think mentioned that was the situation in Ghana last week when we talked last week as well, that the Parliament has very limited time to review the budget. So much information, very little time. What should you be looking for? What are the key issues that you should be looking for? How do you read a budget quickly? How do you react when you only have 2 weeks? How do you help parliamentarians to find the key issues in the budget? These are the issues that we're going to be speaking about this morning. And we're very fortunate to have my good friend Ibrahim Jamisa, who is the director of the Parliamentary Budget Office in Sierra Leone, joining us to make a presentation on this topic. And later we'll have Phyllis Macau, who is the former parliamentary budget officer and actually the first parliamentary budget officer for Kenya, making a presentation as well on this topic. So I think instead of me telling the participants or sharing with the participants why I think PBOs are so valuable, and they are very valuable, I think I'll leave that to Ibrahim, who's going to start off the proceedings this morning. But I think one thing I do want to say before we start is I was in Zambia a couple of years ago. I have to say, I don't know how it's like for all of my brothers and sisters that travel a lot, but sometimes you forget which month, which year. And that's why sometimes I say, I think I was there a couple of years ago. But I was in Zambia and I was doing training for the Zambia Civil Society Debt Coalition, specifically on how to use the open budget survey. And somebody advised that the client, it was a National Democratic Institute that was sponsoring it, and they said, oh, by the way, we're going to have the Parliamentary Budget Office attend. And I thought, oh, okay, sure, that's fine. Zambia has a very small startup parliamentary budget office. I didn't realize the power, how in watching the participation between the PBO and the civil society organizations, I didn't realize what natural partners and allies civil society and parliamentary budget offices really are. I think sometimes parliamentary budget offices, if they don't have good, this is certainly not the case with our friend Ibrahim in Sierra Leone, but other PBOs, sometimes they can become like ivory towers a little bit and not be as connected to what's happening on the ground. And CSOs can often, for exactly the reason you're here, not understand necessarily what the entry points are for participating in the budget process. And so together, it is a marriage made in heaven. Ibrahim, why don't we turn it over to you? If you're on the, I hope you're on the line to kick things off. Ibrahim is the director of the PBO in Sierra Leone. Ibrahim, I see you have a PowerPoint presentation. Why don't you, before we start, why don't you maybe just tell us just make sure that your presentation includes a bit of background on what the PBO does in case there are those of us who haven't heard of it before. So hopefully, Ibrahim, you're on the line and we can turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maybe what I need to do is to perhaps connect the PowerPoint. Then I would give this background information. Okay. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So basically, like Jeff has rightly explained, my role this morning is to do a very brief presentation on the role of the budget approving process and the entry point for civil society engagement in the same process. But like I said, I am the director for the Parliamentary Budget Office of Sierra Leone. And basically what we do, just like all other parliamentary budget offices across the world, our role is to support members of parliament and parliamentary committees, to provide alternative opinion to them, to make sure that we do fiscal analysis that help them to understand macro-fiscal issues, public financial management related issues, public policy related issues. We all know that for most jurisdictions, for you to become a member of parliament, you don't need to be a professional in any of those disciplines. There is a separate requirement. But once you're elected as an MP, you come to parliament, you're expected now to make a decision on very critical documents, sometimes that has to do with the economy, sometimes that has to do with the public financial management issues, sometimes that has to do with policy options. So if you do not have the expertise and you're expected to make opinion or to scrutinize those documents, then for the most part, you're going to rely on what perhaps comes from the executive arm of government. And again, for most jurisdictions, it is expected that the three arms of government are expected to operate independently: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. So the Parliamentary Budget Offices is an internal structure set up to be able to look at critical document, for example, that comes from the executive, and then give an alternative opinion to members of parliament. It's an in-house structure. So if the national budget, for example, that comes to parliament for approval, we would look at the national budget document. We look at maybe the macroeconomic assumptions that are suggested by the executive arm of government. We look at the figures. We look at so many other issues around the figures, and then tell the members of parliament to say, this is what we feel about what has been submitted. This is what we think should have been instead of this, in our own opinion. But then it is left with the members of parliament and parliamentary and the MPs, the parliamentary committees, to decide on whether your suggestions or your opinions or your options they would listen to them, or they will go with what the executive says, or they will do otherwise. So basically, that is what we do. I think that gives you a fair idea of what the Parliamentary Budget Office is. Having said that, I would like to go straight to the presentation, given that we've got a very limited time to deliver the presentation slides. Maybe later, after the presentation, if there are questions or comments, you would have the floor to for us to discuss them. Thank you so much. I'm sure all of you can see the slide from where you are. So this is going to be my presentation outline, like I did explain to you. Excuse me, let me just close this. Okay, I think this is fine. So this is my presentation outlook. What we want to talk about is the role of Parliament in the budget approval process, and then entry point for CSO's engagement. And it's saying that I am would have a brief introduction to state budget, because we need to understand, if we're talking about the role of Parliament in budget approval, we need to understand what a state budget is, maybe just a summary information on that. And then we need to also talk briefly about the budget circle, so that we get to understand where Parliament is actually to be included and why. And then we would talk now about the role of Parliament in the budget approval process generally, and then the entry point for civil society engagement in my own view, and then we would have the Q&A session. I hope everybody sees the screen, right? Is it clear?
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much.
Very clear.
All right, thank you so much. So this is what we're going to be discussing in the next few minutes. So under the introduction, we talk about a state budget. What is a state budget? We need to understand that. So basically, when they talk about a state budget, it's a purse. It's a big envelope that we need to get clear understanding of what it is. Please hold on a bit. I am having this that I don't need on my screen. Let me just try to get it, get rid of it, or perhaps, okay, maybe I put it here. Okay, that's fine. So what is a state budget when we talk about, but generally when they say budget, we all know budget is a plan of action expressed in monetary terms. That is the simplest way I can explain to somebody that is not an accountant, that is not an economist, that doesn't have too much of finance or economic background. A plan of action expressed in monetary terms, generally. So with that concept in mind, when somebody says a state budget, you are right to say that it's a plan of action expressed in monetary terms. You're right to also say that state budget is the financial plan containing the estimated revenue and expenditure of government for a specified period of time, usually a year. So that is what happened. The estimated revenue and expenditure. So when you look at the state budget, it has two components. It is divided into two. You have the expenditure component, and then you have the revenue component. The revenue, of course, is what determines what you're going to have as revenue, is what informs the expenditure. Revenue has its own categories. You have the domestic revenues, you have revenues from other sources like donations and grants and all of those things. I don't want to go into the details, and then of course you come to the expenditure component. But what is important for you to understand is that the state budget has a revenue component and the expenditure component. And for the most part, we prepare a budget for a period. Budget is approved for a period of 1 year. Though if you look at the MTEFT, the medium-term expenditure framework, the framework that is usually used for the preparation of budget for most jurisdictions, especially in Africa, you would see that there is always comparative figures. They will tell you what was the position last year, just for you to compare with what it is this year. And then a forecast figure would also be presented for the following year. But what the focus is going to be, the focus position for the following year, and then also maybe the previous year figures, they are just to guide you. Your focus is actually on the one that is related to the year. On that note again, you are also right to say that it is an instrument utilized to actualize development plan of the state. So we all know before a government comes to power, they would have their development plan. They will have their manifesto, they will have maybe the medium-term development plan or long-term development plan or whatever it is. So those development plan that were perhaps in the manifesto or those information that are in the short-term development plan that the government intends to focus on, those things they have to translate into the budget. Because at the end of the day, for you to be able to do those things, you're going to have a budget to implement them. So in other words, somebody is right to say that it is the development plan of the government. It's an instrument used to actualize the development plan of the government. So the last one also on the same definition, you can say it is an economic policy instrument for managing the national economy. So generally, if you want to manage the national economy of a state, you use a budget. So basically, that is the general information you need to understand about the state budget. Maybe another one that is also very important you need to know is, what are the key attributes of a state budget? If you say this budget belongs to the state, there are fundamentals that needs to be seen in that budget. Otherwise, you would not want to call it a state budget. What are those attributes? One, like I said, it must be related to the development plan of the state, of the country. So if you are doing a budget that is not related to your national development plan, then that budget, I'm sorry to say, shouldn't be considered for a budget. That is why when a budget is presented to Parliament, the draft budget is presented to Parliament, the very first thing the Parliamentary Budget Office does when we want to do the review is to see the policy alignment, the program's alignment to the National Development Plan. We want to be sure that what the government says they want to do is in conformity with what is expected of citizens or what is in the development plan, because it is on the basis of that plan that the government is elected. Also, it must be clear and transparent for the understanding of all. So you don't necessarily need to be an economist or an accountant for you to understand a state budget. It should be straightforward. If you look at it, you should be able to know that, okay, $1 million has been allocated to Ministry of Health, $500,000 has been allocated to Ministry of Education, as the case may be. You should be able to understand that, okay, for road construction for this year, this is what the government is putting in place. For salaries and wages, this is the figure. You don't have to make it so complex that ordinary readers are not able to make meanings out of it. And then also another attribute of a state budget, it must be an instrument of accountability in the management of funds. Yes, it has to be an instrument of accountability. So you make it public, you're going to clearly show where the revenues are coming from and where the expenditures are going to be directed to. And then you have to allow the public to be able to critique it. And then also another most important thing about it, please hold on a bit. Another one, it must identify costs and the sources of funds for meeting those costs. I think I've just explained that. The cost and the sources of getting those costs all should be in the budget. And then perhaps the last one, this is not exhaustive, but these are just key ones I want to just share with you. The national budget of any country, for the most part, is on cash basis. Like I said, it's a 3-year rolling budget, which I've just explained to you. You have to show comparative figures of where you intend to go the following year. They are just forecast. They can change those forecasts for the previous year because economic circumstances can change. Don't forget, when you do the budget, you do it on the basis of assumptions, economic assumptions. So if those parameters change within the course of the year, then they're going to affect the numbers. So basically, these are the few things you need to know, maybe given the time for about a state budget. Now, let's quickly look at the national budget circle. The national budget circle, we're quickly going to look at that. Yes. So, because for you to be able to understand the entry point of Parliament, when we talk about budget approval, we generally need to understand the budget circle itself. Now, Sorry, my screen is a bit misbehaving, but let me just try to fix it up. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I didn't know that I was muted. Sir, can you hear me now?
Yes. So we haven't, with regard to this slide, we haven't heard any information yet,
Okay.
but of course we've heard you from the previous slides.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So,
No problem.
Okay. So I was actually talking now. For you to be able to understand the budget approval process in Parliament, you need to first of all have an idea of how the budget cycle looks like. So that's what I was trying to explain. So I have this one slide that explains the national budget cycle. And this, I believe, is the same for almost all jurisdictions. Yeah. Most people say Parliament approves. Most important, you need to understand whether your Parliament or it is a budget making Parliament. That is very important. In my case in Sierra Leone, the 1991 Constitution says Parliament is the law-making body of the state. And we all know that apart from the Constitution of any jurisdiction, the second most important legislation in any country is the budget, because it is the budget that informs the implementation, or that actually spearhead the implementation of all other laws. So the budget is the second most important legislation in any jurisdiction. So if that is true, and it is Parliament that is actually, Parliament by law is a lawmaking body, then I always tell my members of Parliament, I'm not a legal person, but that our Parliament actually makes the budget. We don't approve budget. But for the purpose of convenience, people would always say that, okay, Parliament approves the budget. But in reality, we actually make the budget. Because all other laws that comes to Parliament, we don't say Parliament approves those laws. What we have actually been saying is Parliament has made this law. And the Constitution is very clear to say Parliament makes laws. So I like to use the word Parliament actually makes the budget and it doesn't approve it. But we'll take it that for the purpose of this year, we're actually approving. So the budget cycle starts with the planning and fiscal strategy development. This is an activity that is handled by the executive arm of government, maybe by start of the accounting year or the budget cycle. They will do the planning, they will do the fiscal strategy statement. They will use their macroeconomic variables, they do the necessary analysis, they go to the market, try to get their numbers, and then they come and actually forecast the economy, what it is projected to be in the following year. So that is the very first phase. And then the next phase, you have the budget preparation and forecasting. That is the time for most countries. You would see the Ministry of Finance would introduce they will send out what they call the budget call circular to ministries, agencies, and departments. And then the MDAs will put their figures. Maybe they have the budget committees for each and every ministry, agency, and department. They will put their figures together. They will have bilateral discussion to discuss the figures. And when the figures are discussed, then the Ministry of Finance consolidates. And then those consolidated figures are put together. They develop a document they call the appropriation bill. And then that bill is submitted to Parliament. So all of that happens during the budget preparation and forecasting stage. And then you have the budget up to the time the budget is brought to Parliament, and up to the time the budget is approved by Parliament, you're still on stage 2, which is the budget preparation and forecasting. So they do the forecast, you prepare at executive level, and then it is brought to Parliament. Parliament does the approval, or Parliament makes it, or whatever. So then all of that is stage 2. After that, you have the budget execution, cash management, and internal controls. So it is at that point now, maybe by start of after the approval of the budget, the executive has the power to actually do the distribution based on the allocation, the way it has been assigned by Parliament. And then cash management, of course, each and every institution will do their cash management provisions. And during the budget execution, again, you have a lot of players that has to do their respective responsibilities. And then you have the accounting and financial reporting. So at the end of the financial year, the accounts are prepared, and then you have the external audits. The supreme audit institutions will then audit the state institution. Maybe for the SOE, state-owned enterprises, they would have specific auditors within the jurisdictions appointed either by the state-owned institutions, or perhaps they have the authority to get their own auditors, to recruit their own auditors. But then the most important thing is audit takes place. It might not necessarily be done by the supreme audit institution, especially if they are overwhelmed and their staff number is very small. So now, these are the phases. What is very important for you to know is that at each and every stage here, Parliament has a role to play. At the planning and fiscal strategy development stage, the fiscal strategy document is developed, and that document is usually brought to Parliament. For some jurisdictions, it is brought for parliamentary review and approval. For some, it is brought to them just for their information purpose. So it depends on what your law says. But what is important is, at every stage, Parliament has a role to play. Now, when you look at public financial management laws for most jurisdictions, you would see institutional responsibilities in the budget-making process. Each and every state institution has its own role. The Ministry of Finance, the Parliament, you talk about the audit service, you talk about the implementing institutions and all of that. Now, when you come to the budget preparation and forecasting, Parliament also has a role to play. That is where we will either say Parliament approves the budget or Parliament makes the budget. When you come to budget execution, cash management, and internal controls, that is where we do most of the oversight, the non-oversight activities. And then you come to the accounting and financial reporting. Of course, Parliament itself as an institution account, it does financial report, and then it also do oversight on accounting and financial reporting on other institutions. And then external audits, when the audit reports are presented, they are also brought to Parliament for Public Account Committee review and actions. So you would see that all the five stages I've highlighted, Parliament has a role to play. But if you can see from the screen, I have actually highlighted the budget preparation and forecasting stage, because this is where the focus is. We want to know the role of Parliament in the budget approval. So all the 5 stages, Parliament has a role, but we want to now zero down on what happens at the budget preparation and forecasting. And in looking at that, this is what I want us to look at. Firstly, when you talk about the budget making or budget approval, whichever you're convenient with, we need to talk about the legal authority. In my case for Sierra Leone, for instance, we've got the 1991 Constitution, specifically section 110 to 119, that says Parliament is a lawmaking body and that has given the authority to Parliament to actually make the national budget. But then also, in addition to that, the nitty-gritties on how that process should be conducted when the budget is brought to Parliament is in the parliamentary standing orders, specifically standing order 63 to 69. They are all online if you want to look at them. Standing order 63 to 69 of Sierra Leone actually explain the details as to how the budget process should be conducted when the budgets are brought to Parliament. We'll look at them shortly. And then, of course, you also have the Public Financial Management Act of 2016, which is the most updated. And then also other financial legislations, including procurement laws, including the budget and accountability laws, the National Revenue Act, and all of that. So these are all legislations that Parliament actually use when they put the national budget together. Now, Parliament makes laws, like I explained to you. We are responsible for lawmaking, representation, and oversight. That is very critical for us to understand. And like I did say, at every stage, Parliament has a role to play in the national budget cycle. So, when the budget is brought to Parliament, it is submitted a draft appropriation bill. Like in my case, our budget came on Friday, like yesterday, yes. It was read yesterday. We had the first reading of the budget yesterday. It was presented by the minister. So as I even speak, I'm here in the office with my entire team. We are doing a lot of reviews on MDA submissions and all of that, but we'll come to that anyway. So now we've talked about the 5 stages in the budget cycle. But we are now coming to specifically look at the stages again that the budget goes through when it is brought to Parliament. There are 4 stages that the budget goes through, which is actually the budget approval process or the budget process in Parliament. The stage 1, we call it the first reading of the budget. In the case of Sierra Leone, reading and presentation of the budget Parliament is done by the Minister of Finance. And that is enforced by Section 41 of the Public Financial Management Act of 2016. That law says that the Minister of Finance is expected to put the figures together, and it should be a public hearing. So that is what we have just done yesterday. The 2025 budget has been brought, and it has been read by the Minister of Finance. When that is done, the budget is laid. They call that the laying of the budget. Now, it is going to, the second reading of the budget will happen. Perhaps it can be the same day, it can be the following day. But after that first reading, the second stage, they call it the second reading of the budget. That is where the budget is debated. In our own laws for Sierra Leone, for example, the budget should be debated for a maximum of 5 days. It can be less than 5 days, but the second reading of the budget goes along with debating the budget, and that debate is conducted for a period of 5 days. It is during that period you would see opposition parties, the ruling parties, everybody trying to make his own point as to what they believe or what they understand relating to the content of the budget. And that is the time the Parliamentary Budget Office is extremely, always very busy, because what you're trying to do is not either supporting the ruling party or the opposition. What you're expected is to do analysis on the budget generally as you've seen it, taking into consideration the economic circumstances, and then you give those information to members of Parliament. So they use it to be able to understand the issues, the fact behind the figures, and that actually enrich their debate. So what we are doing now, the reason why we are in the office today, they are starting reading the first reading of the budget by next week, maybe Monday or Tuesday. So by today to Monday, we are expected, the budget office is expected to be able to look at the budget document itself, the fiscal strategy statement, which copy I have here on my table. This is it. And then we are expected to produce a brief that we'll share with all members of Parliament. It's one brief you share with all of them. Everybody picks his own bits and pieces that they're interested in generally. So that is the second reading of the budget. And then after that stage, you have the third stage that we call the committee stage. So when the 5 days or 3 days of the budget reading is completed, they go to the committee stage, where a committee of supply or appropriation subcommittees are set up. So the budget will be submitted to those committees to say, this is what they have given to us. We have looked at this budget, we have debated it, we have looked at the issues behind the budget, but now we want to look at the figures either by sector or by ministry, agency, and department to ascertain whether we think we are comfortable with those figures or we are not comfortable with the figures. If there is anyone we are not comfortable with, we should be able to produce a report to explain why. In our case in Sierra Leone, the 1991 Constitution and the Public Financial Management Act says the Parliament of Sierra Leone can actually make an amendment to the budget, but that amendment should either be plus or minus 5% of the figures that are submitted by the executive arm of government. We cannot alter the budget entirely. Equally so, but then we Parliament has the authority to make a decision as to whether they want to approve the budget or they allow the executive to implement or not. They can decide to withhold the budget entirely. They can decide to withhold some component of the budget in their own wisdom. But we don't have the authority, or Parliament hasn't got the authority to, like, say, for example, if they say the total revenue is going to be 10 trillion leones or $10 million, for example, Parliament hasn't got the authority to make it $20 million, the revenue, because the fundamentals that the executive has used, and they are the ones that are raising the revenue. I think that is the spirit behind that provision. They understand they are going to generate the revenue, so you can't alter that entirely. It creates a lot of issues. But then we can make plus or minus 5% adjustment among ministries, agencies, and departments. And then after that stage, which is the committee stage, sometimes the committee of appropriations sits for about 7 days, 5 days, depending on circumstances, and then they put all. So when we are at that committee stage, a lot of things happen, but we'll come to that shortly. After that committee stage, when the committee is done with their work, they submit the budget together with the report to the plenary, that is the committee of the whole house, where all the members of parliament goes to the well, and then the chairman for finance committee will come and present his report. So that's part of the reading of the budget. We call it third reading of the budget. And that is where the budget is enacted into law, or the parliament will make a decision to say we are not enacting this budget. Then if it is enacted, it moves from the appropriation bill to appropriation act. So these are the 4 stages that the budget goes through. But because it's on this committee stage, now I have explained the first reading of the budget by the Minister of Finance, second reading where it is debated by all MPs, and then the third reading, I have explained to you that it is where the budget is either enacted or acted. Where a lot of work happens is at that committee stage, the appropriation committee stage. So I am also now going to explain the detail of that. Take note of the sequence, the way we are going. We've talked about the national budget cycle generally and where parliament is placed. And then when we come to where parliament is placed, we've talked about the stages that the thing goes through, all the first. Also zero down to what happens at the committee stage, which is the committee of supplies or committee on appropriation. So now, at that committee on appropriation, so many things happen. So let me give you some background information briefly. Before this time ago, what Parliament of Sierra Leone was doing, we had just about 6 appropriation committees. The entire Parliament was divided into 6 groups, because there is no law that says Parliament should divide itself into 5 or 2 groups or 1 group. All the law says is Parliament should divide itself into groups and review the budget before approval. So Parliament can actually change the number of groups depending on what their interest is at that point in time in approving the budget. Before this time, we had about 6 groups in 2019, 2020, and before that time. There were 6 groups. But then the number of ministries, agencies, and departments increased years. Then we realized that the 6th group was not sufficient for us to be able to review close to 200 ministries, agencies, and departments. Then last 2021, we reviewed and then we introduced what we call sectorial system. So if you have Ministry of Health, for example, all the commissions under the Ministry of Health will be grouped into one sector, and then one committee is set up to review their own budget. So for 2021, 2022, we had that sectorial system. And what we are also doing, the oversight committee that is providing oversight on Ministry of Health, we just converted, we adopted it to serve as appropriation committee. The idea was, if you are doing oversight for an MDA within the year, you are expected to understand their issues better. So it is easier for you to be able to probe into their budget to know what they are saying, whether it is correct or not. So we had 11 appropriation committees in 2021 and 2022. And then, we had 31 appropriation committees, because that was the number of oversight committees, excluding in-house committees. So we tried that in 2021, 2022. 2023, we realized that also had its own challenges. So we switched again because of administrative inconvenience. The number of space for 31 committees to be constituted within Parliament. The whole place was chaotic and all of that. So we had to again revert to 11 committee system. So now, as I speak with you, last year and then this year, sorry, we had 11 appropriation committees set up. So those 11 committees are set up. The ministries, agencies, and departments are divided into 11 groups. So some committees would have maybe up to 20 MDAs, some will have up to 15 MDAs, and we make sure that all MDAs that have related functions are grouped in the same group, so that when you talk about legal issues, the group that is going to look at the judiciary, we look at the Law Reform Commission, we look at the Legal Aid Board, all of those ones that has legislative issues goes to that, so that it is easier for that committee to be able to connect the dots. So, but there is a key instrument we use during the appropriation process. We call that instrument the appropriation questionnaire. So it is actually a document the Parliamentary Budget Office put together that we have been reviewing from time to time that looks at now, Parliament during appropriation invite MDAs to come over, to come and explain the previous money they used, how they were able to use it, and the one they are requesting for, what is the purpose and how much they are requesting for, to come and explain for themselves. So that checklist has a lot of questions we ask the MDAs to respond to. So before they come to Parliament, the Budget Office analyze that checklist, and then those analyses we put together, we give to the committees, because we are aware that not all of them will have expertise in finance or economics. So we just give them all the facts and figures, maybe a 2-page document. Then when the MDAs appear, or it becomes easier for them. So that appropriation questionnaire also has its own nomenclature. So at every point in time, if there is an interest area, for example, public debt, we want to focus on Parliament probing into public debt, then we amend the provision in that questionnaire that deals with the issue of public debt. So we have that. And then apart from the appropriation, 11 appropriation committees that is usually set up, we also require vote controllers, ministers, deputy ministers, heads of ministries, agencies, and departments, technical heads. We request all of them to attend. Yes, Jeff, do you want to say something?
Oh, I just want to just say that I think this is great so far. I think let's maybe finish this slide, and then we'll take some questions from the participants just in case they have questions to clarify. We're starting to come close to the end of your time allocated.
Oh, okay. So do you want me maybe to wrap up in 2 minutes?
Yeah, I think this slide is very important, so I do think you should continue and then maybe finish the slide, and then let's take some questions from the group. Is that okay?
All right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So all of them usually come, the vote controllers and everybody, they are always invited. And then the hearings are usually public hearings. And then you also have, when the hearings are conducted, reports are put together. And then those reports are consolidated into one. We call it the appropriation report. So the budget is actually passed into law, haven't considered provisions in that report. If the Parliament says we are making 2% adjustment to this MDA, and we are taking the money from this end, so those adjustments are actually part of that, and then that report is usually presented to the chairman, is presented by the chairman finance committee. So basically that is what happens at that stage. I think the only slide now we had was the intervention of the CSOs, the entry point of CSOs into the process. But since the time has ended,
before we get to that, let's just stop and see if there are any questions about the budget approval process. I love how comprehensive your presentation was. When I talk about the budget approval process, I have one slide that talks about, that talks about the process. You broke it down into multiple pieces. You talked about the appropriations committees. Let's just see if there are any questions from the participants at this point. Any questions or clarifications so far on Ibrahim's presentation? You have a very very good case study into the approval phase today.
Good morning. I am Ishmael, sponsor and I have a few questions to ask Mr. Ibrahim.
We're not hearing you too clearly, though.
Okay.
Good morning. I am Ishmael Alex Conte, and I have a few questions to ask. One of them is that what happens when a budget is being disapproved, if possible? I don't know if there are any mechanism that when a budget is being disapproved that are set forth. I don't know. And I think that's one of my questions. And as we go along, I'll be asking the remaining questions. Hello?
Ibrahim, you might be muted, I think. You might be answering, but be muted.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. I've taken note of Ishmael's question.
Okay. So, should I continue?
Yeah, go ahead. If there are more questions, or if they said, I want to take a few of them, then I respond.
Okay. Does a monetary mechanism provided after a budget is being disapproved? Is being approved, sorry. Does a monetary mechanism provided after a budget is being approved? That's another question. And the last
please
one.
Come again. Please come again. Monetary mechanism, if it is provided.
Does a monetary mechanism provided after a budget is being approved?
What do you mean by that? I need to get it clear so that.
Okay. For example,
go ahead.
After a budget is being approved, are there any monitoring?
Okay. Yes, I've got it. Okay, yeah.
Okay, then.
I've got it.
And the last one reads: what are the main challenges faced in implementing a budget?
Okay, noted.
Okay, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you so much. We also have a question from John. He had his hand up. And then Momo.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Abdurrahman from Sierra Leone, Freetown. I work for the Budget Advocacy Network.
Okay.
Thanks for the presentation, Junisa. Very precise and enlightening. I just want to know if you have had any situation wherein the Parliamentary Budget Office has done an analysis and the parliamentarians accepted it or rejected the analysis provided, looking at our political context in Sierra Leone. That's one. Two, is there any way that the Parliamentary Budget Office can strengthen collaboration with civil society actors in the analysis that you do, so that you also have independent, observations or suggestions, so that the analysis you provide can be very comprehensive to be able to enlighten our parliamentarians to engage during the process of approving the budget. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I've noted that.
Do you want to start with those questions, or do you want to take
Yes. Yeah, so let me take those ones. Ishmael, okay. The one from Ishmael.
I just want to bring to your attention, Ibrahim.
Yes.
Let's not get too much into, like, there were some very good questions from Ishmael about the budget implementation. That's next week's topic. So, Ishmael, you asked a really good couple of questions. What happens once the budget is approved? How is it monitored? We're going to talk about that next week. That's what live session 4 and that's what module 4 is all about. So we want to just make sure we don't spend too much time getting into that today. Let's focus as much on the budget approval process as possible.
Okay. So given that information, I think I will skip the last two questions from Ishmael.
Yes,
to say what happens budget monitoring after budget approval and main challenges in implementing the budget. Perhaps we can shelve those ones for next week. But then let me come to this. What happens when the budget is not approved, if it is disapproved? Well, for the few years I've actually been in this country, or that as far as I have followed budgetary processes, and for most jurisdictions, it is very rare for the budget not to be passed. Amendments can be made, but that is the law. But if for any reason the budget holistically is not being approved by the Parliament, Parliament is very much aware that governance has to go on, and the legislative, executive arm of government cannot function if the required approval is not given. And when the financial year comes to an end, a new financial year starts, they will not be able to implement. So Parliament has the authority maybe to approve some portion of the budget, to say, okay, this lump sum we are approving, you can use to do legitimate expenditure for state functioning for the time being until we actually look into the rest of the budget. We have actually not had an instance before where the budget is entirely disapproved. And I don't think that can easily happen. But for the most part, this is what Parliament will do. They can approve some posts, specific posts, to say, we are giving you authority to use this one. That's, as far as my knowledge goes, that is what I know. On Abdurrahman Ban, thank you so much, my brother. Whether PBO analysis in the past has been accepted or rejected, yes, I would not say rejected, but I know that we have done a couple of analyses in the past, and most of those analyses have been used by members of Parliament. If you are online now, you can go to the Parliament of Sierra Leone website. You go to Budget Office specifically, and then you click. You put the drop-down menu. You see some few analyses we did for them in the past. Some of them that are for public consumption, they are published on the website. So for us, we are not too focused on whether they would reject or they would accept. Our mandate says you give them advice. You give them your opinion. So once we provide our opinion to them, we use the standard platform to circulate to all of them. It is now at their discretion to decide on whether they would use that opinion or they want to do otherwise. But sometimes, most of the things we give to them, they would use. And we've also had instances, some analysis you give to them, they are not utilized as we would want. But again, like I said, it is at their discretion. So I give you an example. When we were reviewing the appropriation questionnaire some years, I think in 2022, we realized that withholding taxes and payees are deducted for the most part. For some MDAs, they were not submitting to NRA. They would deduct from contractors, but submissions were not done to Revenue Authority. They use for operational purposes. Then we did some analysis around that. We had an engagement with the MPs. We told them to say, we realize government is losing revenue because of withholding tax deductions not remitted. And they took it in good faith. They asked us for what we think we can do in the form of oversight to address that. We agreed that we should put something in the appropriation questionnaire that we'd ask MDAs to provide evidence of withholding taxes deducted and remitted, and if there is any outstanding, why. And they accepted, and we inserted that. So even now they're debating, the Finance Act has been passed. We did a little bit of briefing notes on that, though the time was very short. We gave some of them use it during the course of their debate. Some of the analysis we do, they're actually not for publication purpose. It's for either specific MPs or specific committees or the committee of the whole house, and we give that as well to them. So that is a position on that. On CSOs and PBOs, I think the question was actually around how we can collaborate on information we put together, the analysis we do. I think one CSO we have actually been collaborating with is Budget Advocacy Network in terms of engaging. Sometimes we discuss issues, and we also have budgets. We have also had series of engagement with them. But most importantly, yes, I agree, there is need for CSOs and PBO to actually collaborate, though we are also very mindful that we have a mandate that is in law, and our work should be confined within the scope of that mandate. We know that there are also civil societies. Sometimes maybe their mandates are flexible, and some of them, maybe they have some specific circumstances that push what they do. So we are very much, the most important thing is when we collaborate with civil society, we keep our eyes on the ball. We make sure that we focus on what our mandate is. So basically that is that. And for the most part, the work we do also can be public, but if it is for specific committee work, our focus is to give it the primary beneficiaries. These ones we publish are the ones we believe that other researchers and a lot of other people needs to benefit from. I think basically these are the questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, and we have two more questions, and then we'll need to wrap up. But a question from Momo. What is the duration of the budget process from start to final decision? And who has the final decision of the parliament or the president of the country? Clarification, please. That's question number one, and that's in the chat as well if you need it. And the second question is from John. He says, oh, sorry, just a second. Yeah, John's question is, since how has the PBO received cooperation between ruling and opposition during budget debates? In the situation of deadlock on a particular aspect of the budget, what position does the PBO take?
Okay, receive cooperation.
I can drop the question in the chat for you. Do you have access to the Zoom chat? You can see it?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm going to drop it right into.
Okay, so I started one for Momo, the duration of the budget process. For us here in Sierra Leone, the current law we have says budget should be brought to Parliament at least 6 months before the end of the financial year. Financial year. So in that instance, it means from mid-November to, because December is 4 weeks, and then you have 2 more weeks in November. So we've actually got only 6 months. It can be brought earlier than that, but that is what the law says. It shouldn't be brought later than that. Currently, before this time, it was 3 months before the end of the financial year, but that was changed some 8 years ago or whatever. So that's the current law. Parliament only has 6 months to be able to review and either approve or make the budget. That's what we have. So I think that is that on that. And then how has the do we receive cooperation between the ruling and opposition parties? So the work of the Parliamentary Budget Office is a very critical one. But what is very important is you have to understand that your role is to provide opinion, and that opinion has to be independent, that opinion has to be timely, and that opinion has to be non-partisan. So what we do is, whether you are ruling or your opposition, whether you agree with us or you disagree with us, we make sure what information we are going to put out first is an information that is realistic, and it is something we can defend with all the information. I mean, the fact or maybe you references available. So if we don't receive cooperation from you, or you believe you don't buy into our idea, perhaps because of your political thought, there is very little we can do about it, but we know that this one is something we can defend. Yes, you would have instances, certain information you put out as budget office, certain MPs would know that this is a fact, but maybe for one or two reasons or their party position on that issue, they may decide to restrain themselves. There is very little you can do about it. But for the most part, for as long as they know that your information is timely and the references are available, nobody would have any reason to critique it. They will either decide not to just use it if they don't want to use it for some reasons, but they will know that this is a fact that has been presented to us. So, and this is how we have actually been able to get cooperation from them. If there is a deadlock, what we also try to do, if there is information we provide, maybe we believe the content is not quite explicit to them, we find a way to also engage both the ruling and the opposition party, perhaps at leadership level. Then we do more clear representation for them to just understand our own position. That's all we do. We don't actually go beyond that. What happens at that party level and all of that, we've got very little to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think we've run out of time, but at the same time, you have a very important slide up right now, which is entry points for CSOs. You're just getting now to the Holy Grail. So I don't know what to say. Can you take maybe a couple of minutes, 2 minutes, just to present the slide? So because we do have to move to another part of our agenda, but this is very important information.
Yeah, I think I can do it in 2 minutes or even less than that. It's just one slide.
Okay.
But if we also think there is no time, then I can just share the presentation slides later.
I think you're too close to the truth right now to stop. This is because this is the moment that I think the group has been waiting for, is how CSOs could participate with Parliament during budget approval. So if you
Okay.
could take 2 minutes, that would be good.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. So CSO's entry point. So basically, when the budget is in Parliament, there are so many ways CSOs can actually collaborate with Parliament to improve the process. One, in my view, is engaging in pre-budget consultations. CSOs can provide input or advocate for priorities. They can actually, there should be a platform where before the budget even comes to Parliament, the civil society do their own input, and those input positions are actually presented to Parliament. And Parliament should be able to consider those input. Monitoring parliamentary budget approval process. So there should also be monitoring parliamentary approval, parliamentary budget discussions. So I also believe civil society should create the time to be able to attend parliamentary sessions. Now, our sessions here are actually public hearings. We make sure that it is covered by the media, but civil society that are also into budgetary processes, it is good for them to send representatives to also know what happens at the budget approval process. They can also engage with the appropriation committees. That may not be happening for now, but in my view, I believe it is also good they should have the platform to engage with appropriation committees. Another one is capacity building for parliamentary budget office. Now, the PBO is the professional structure that is expected to support MPs on all of those things. And the PBO stays within Parliament. They are not going and coming like members of Parliament. So if we actually want to have fiscal accountability, a very strong system that can actually checkmate the legislature, the executive, it is good to capacitate the budget office in every form. And then also, we should have capacity building for parliamentarians. This could either be done together with the budget office and also civil societies, but it is good to increase the capacity of MPs to be able to understand the way the budget works, the way the budget itself is, the composition and all of that. Advocacy and campaigning. You can also do lobby. Those that are into specific things, say for example, issues having to do with disability. If your civil society is on disability issues and you see that funds allocated to them is very small, you can do lobby. You can lobby Parliament. You can do public awareness campaigns before the budget comes to say, hey, this is what we believe. This is a budget that has been presented to Parliament, but we believe this area has not been adequately addressed. We believe this MDA, last year money was given to them. We had a lot of misappropriation issues. We had a lot of issues in the audit report. We believe if these issues are not addressed, Parliament should not approve their budget. You do those public advocacy and campaigns, Parliament can listen to those ones as well. Strengthening transparency and accountability in the process. Timely presentation of the budget document. Again, that's another important thing. So you can actually support or collaborate, or you do a lot of advocacy to make sure that budget documents are presented to Parliament on time. Because sometimes for most jurisdictions, the legislature does not receive the budget on time. Like what was mentioned for Malawi and the other country by Geoff before we start the session. And then we can also use the media quite a lot. Those civil society that are into media space, you can also use that to also propagate the good work that has been done by Parliament, and that actually entices them to do more. So these are some of the ways that I believe we can actually.
Oh, I think you just became muted, Ibrahim.
Didn't even.
You said this ways that we can, and then we lost you there.
Yes, I said at this point, I think these are some of the ways. They are not exhaustive, but these are some of the ways civil society can actually enter into the process. And this is the way I believe they can collaborate with Parliament during the budget approval process. It may not be all of them, but some of them can be practical. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ibrahim. If you're able to stick around for the rest of the live session for the next 45 minutes, we'd be happy to have you. I'm going to turn it over to Adams now to lead the breakout groups, and I think the discussion will be very much based on civil society's role in influencing the approval process. So Ibrahim, again, thank you so much. Great to see you on screen, and look forward to seeing you in the next quarter in person. And also, there's been several requests for a copy of your presentation. If you're comfortable sharing a PDF version, and you can send it to me or to Adams or to Marilyn at PN Africa, we can post it on the site and we can forward it to the participants.
Okay, I will share that with you. Unfortunately, I'm not sure I will stay around for the next 45 minutes. Like I said,
problem.
my entire team is in Parliament today, and we are doing a lot of reviews because the budget is here. So I
Yes.
have to actually join them at some point, but I'll be coming in and out, or
No
perhaps I will
problem.
connect from my phone. If there's any specific thing for me to attend to, then I would chip in. Thank you.
No problem.
I will share the presentation shortly.
So it's just another work day for the PBO in Sierra Leone. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ibrahim. Adams, over to you.
Okay. I think let's get into our breakout rooms. I'll be with the Anglophone group, and then we'll interrogate the question and come up with suggesting ideas of how we can engage Parliament, influence decision at the approval stage, notwithstanding the limited time.
I think we're going to do 2 breakout groups for English and 1 for French.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah.
So maybe you can just pose the question.
The question is, if you can put it here. Okay. Hello. Who is speaking in the different groups at the back end? Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to read the question out. So how can CSOs work with Parliament to ensure budget decisions reflect public priorities within the limited approval timeline? Breakout groups were fruitful. And I just want to say that I will be, once we introduce our next guest speaker, I'll be turning things over to Adams because I will need to go catch my next plane, my next flight home. So before I do that, though, I just wanted to mention, and I really want to stress the importance of this. Part of the objective of this e-course is to work with NGOs to incubate your next idea. So, in other words, once the e-course is over, those participants who have completed the course and the course requirements will be offered the opportunity to continue the discussion. And we thought the best way to do that would be to have working groups. So we could have a working group looking at the issue of the formulation and approval phase, and another working group looking at the issue of the implementation and audit phase of the budget process. And part of the idea would be to work with your colleagues with participation from Adams and I and support from Adams and I to sort of figure out what kind of initiative you would like to develop in the context of your own country reality. There is no funding for that solution. That would be something that would be a separate issue, but at least in terms of the idea of how your Parliament, how your CSO would like to develop an initiative, that's something that we could help to support. So there'll be more in writing on this coming up by email, but I just wanted to plant the idea. Adams, has Phyllis joined us?
I'm still with you. I'm here.
Okay,
Phyllis? Yeah, I'm just checking on her to join. Yeah.
Okay. Well, while we're waiting for Phyllis, why don't you go ahead and talk a bit about this situation? I think you wanted to share with us your experience about how CSOs in Ghana engage with Parliament in the approval process, and I think that's a very important issue. So why don't you take a few minutes on that while we wait for Phyllis?
Right. We tapped into that conversation briefly, even while I was in the breakout room. Basically, in the experience of Ghana, and I'll chip in briefly also on Sierra Leone. Yes, CSOs have taken advantage or are aware that they need to be innovative in order to influence the approval stage of the budget. The fact is that, just like Sierra Leone, a very limited window is available. And what has worked well in the case of Ghana is that CSOs tap into their well-informed all year round data about what is working in the budget, what issue has funding, and then what deliverables have been met and where the challenges are. And they engage committees specific during the budget window. Here, that is the first day or two that the budget comes to Parliament. Specific committees are engaged by clearly defined thematic area CSOs. I can talk, for example, we have the CSO on gas, the CSO platform on oil and gas, and they have really been very, very effective in influencing the budget on the oil and gas sector. In the case of the Imani Ghana, they also engage the Minister of Finance specifically on the budget. And all of them are able to do that very early, the first day or two when the budget is presented. So the strategy here is to tap into your strengths as CSOs. You know where your strengths are, and you know that you don't have time. You have to have prior arrangement with different committees early enough, even before they go into the formal sitting and debating and review process of the budget for approval. Once it's in the House and it's announced publicly, it is your baby. In some places, like in the case of Ghana, there is what they call the pre-budget hearing. The pre-budget hearing provides opportunity also for CSOs to identify and come together to influence sector-specific budget. In this case, there is always almost 20 or 48-hour conversation that involve all the chairpersons of all the committees, usually outside Accra or at a place of quiet where these leaders can concentrate. I have observed over the past almost 10 years now, that Parliament has accepted that CSOs can make input in the budget review and then approval stage. So usually they are able to join the various committee leaders in this session. What I know is that Parliament will often draw up a calendar around the themes of the budget. They have what they call the real sector. They have also the social sector. They have agri sector, and they have the governance and accountability sector. Usually CSOs have been invited, and it's a great opportunity to tap in and influence the process and decisions that are made before the dotted line is signed off from Parliament that the budget is a done deal. So this is just to mention some key opportunities for CSOs to make input. In the case of Sierra Leone, as I mentioned earlier, my colleagues from Sierra Leone, you will need to take the advantage of your well-informed all year round data around budget achievement and budget challenges to engage the PBO. Because in the case of Sierra Leone, you don't have standing committees that continue to engage the budget during the approval stage. More or less, Parliament is scrambled. And usually the committees, the members who discuss it don't even have their background knowledge as to how issues have been implemented over the year, let alone to deal with the current budget. So that is why it is important that you work with them, with the PBO, to make your input. I think if we have Phyllis around now, we could pause here unless there's a clarification that I can tap into and explain further. Hello? Is Phyllis here?
I don't see her on the list of participants.
Let me give her a call. Because she just, when I was just starting, she said she's ready on my WhatsApp.
Okay.
She should be ready. But I also sent her the link.
Okay, so while you call her, I'll take 1 minute just to say that Phyllis, as I mentioned earlier, was the first head of the Parliamentary Budget Office in Kenya. I just put in the link in the chat for you a copy of or a link to the podcast interview I did with her, so you can get to know her a little bit more. She is a real powerhouse, and she said that when she was working at the Ministry of Finance, she didn't feel that it was necessary to have a parliamentary budget office, but then she became the first parliamentary budget officer. So she's a great example of sometimes the executive branch not seeing the value in a PBO. And she's very open about the fact that, now she, of course, is the parliamentary budget officer. So I'd just like to flag that for you. While we're waiting for Phyllis, Adams, feel free to interrupt me if Phyllis is on the line. But I just want to make a couple of comments. I think Ibrahim has come off, but a couple of things about parliamentary budget offices. So when we look at the parliamentary budget office and the role of the parliamentary budget office, there are still some PBOs in Africa that are still starting out, that are smaller than the PBO in Kenya, for example, or the PBO in South Africa, or the PBO in Uganda. Those are the larger PBOs, and those PBOs tend to be have a fair amount of legal independence, which means that they don't report to the parliament. They are a legal entity in their own. They have their own legal they may report to the parliament, but they're not part of the parliamentary structure. They don't report to the Secretary General, for example. They report directly to Parliament. Some of the smaller PBOs, and that would include Sierra Leone, but also would include Malawi, Zambia. Those PBOs don't have full independence yet. Now they'll get there one day, perhaps, but because they don't have full independence, they have to be very careful sometimes how they are seen to criticize the figures that the government is producing. As you can imagine, if they don't have institutional independence, this makes it very difficult for them to come across or to provide information to say, for example, the government has projected that that there's going to be a 10% 10% increase in revenues. Therefore, the spending can go up quite significantly. And the PBO might come back and say, well, that's actually not, we don't see that happening. We actually see a 5% decrease in revenues. Therefore, you should be cutting back on your spending. Some of the smaller parliaments don't, the PBO is still not fully independent. And so that's why sometimes, like for example, in Malawi, my recollection is that the committees are deciding whether they agree with the PBO's findings or not. I think the budget committee is meeting to discuss whether they agree with the findings or not. If you look at the Canadian experience, which of course is my country, the PBO in a way doesn't really care if the parliamentarians agree or not. Their job is not to get agreement. Their job is to provide, as economists, a separate data point from the Ministry of Finance. So the Ministry of Finance has its experts, and its experts are providing perspective on the Ministry of Finance they're the people who are providing the macroeconomic forecasts, all kinds of information about revenue projections, expenditure projections, debt projections. But then the Parliamentary Budget Office is providing a separate data point. They're not concerned about the opinion of the Finance Ministry. They're going to look at whether or not that information, in their opinion, is accurate. Whether or not the members of Parliament agree with it, that's not really the point for them. So what I'm trying to say is that as PBOs become more independent, they can provide a more independent assessment of the information that's being provided by the Ministry of Finance. And you'll see some of that in Phyllis's the podcast interview that I just included for you in the in the link, in which Phyllis talks about how the PBO started out very small in Kenya. Sorry, I'm very jet lagged. It's only 6 o'clock in the morning here, but how the PBO started very small in Kenya and then eventually achieved its independence. So I hope that perspective is helpful for you. Adams, I'm going to turn it back over to you to lead the rest of the session, because I need to excuse myself to go back to the airport and make my last flight home. If Phyllis is not able to join us, I'm sure you'll be able to lead the discussion very capably for the next 15 minutes. Next week, I'll be joining you. I don't usually travel this much, but next week I'll be joining you from London, where I'll have accompanied a delegation from Iraq to both London and Edinburgh to look at how to strengthen their oversight function. So I hope I have lots of experience to share from you then. So for now, I'm going to say bye, but I will be listening. But I'm going to turn it over to you to lead the last 15 minutes of the session. Thank you so much.
That's fine. Phyllis is just calling now. Let me know what she's having. Hi, Phyllis. Yes, are you able to join us?
Hi, Vinny, in 5 minutes.
Okay, then I will continue while you join us in 3 or so minutes.
Okay.
That's okay. Great.
Okay.
And I said I was going to leave, so I want to do that, but I just want to ask whether or not, we could go a few minutes over if that's okay with PN Africa, so that Phyllis is able to have maybe till we can go till 1:15. But I'll let you figure that out with PN Africa with Marilyn.
Okay.
So I'll say bye for now.
All right. Thank you. Yes, colleagues, let me follow up on what Jeff just talked about to share my experience with you on Kenya PBO and how it's able to provide independent data irrespective of what the finance thinks. At the time I worked with them over a decade ago, they used to have time to produce what they call the alternative budget, which was a documentary of what the situation is in terms of revenue mobilization, in terms of budget implementation, in terms of achievement and outcome, in terms of projected revenues that come true. And this was a go-to data for the budget committee. There was a very, very pro-institutional minded chairperson in the budget committee that made this really work. So there are exceptions in this case, but I want to agree with Jeff that for most of the burden or young PBOs, we may not have this institutional independence to provide data and information that they contradict what the finance ministry is bringing. But that is a very good point to note, that while they have the opportunity, they may not at this point have the legals, or no, I don't call it legal, operational space to deliver as they would want to. For example, in the case of Sierra Leone, I do know, and I would have liked Ivan to be there so that we together think with you as how you can intervene, notwithstanding the challenges of time and also limited operative space. In the case of Sierra Leone, space to even sit is an issue. They don't even have rooms to sit. There are only 2 committee rooms in the main building and the committee room 1. So committee room 1 and then in the new building. So there's a problem of space. However, as I said earlier, if I were working in, let's say, in the water space, I would be very, very particular in engaging and with the PBO to provide them information relevant for this current review that his team are working on now. If the budget comes and the budget PBO has to really interrogate whatever has been brought to them and therefore deliver to the expectation of the various committees as they get the information. Sorry, I'm running away from children who have invaded where I was sitting. Yes. So that said, your context matters. In the case of Kenya, they have the space to provide independent analysis, irrespective of what the finance ministry thinks. But in our cases like Ghana and Sierra Leone, I don't think we still have that luxury. But that is where we have to be innovative in how we engage, in how we make input through early engagement. They have only 1, 2, 3 days. And if you are targeted, you can engage and inform and influence the discussions that go on. For example, I know the Budget Advocacy Network in Sierra Leone. You are part of the Palcito Net, the Parliamentary CSO network. Is a very official platform. You can influence the discussions during the budget stage as they are doing. Let us take advantage of it, engage, and see how we can bring reforms. But after all said and done, we need to think together as CSOs and put pressure on parliaments to provide more accommodating time frame in the long run. But for now, our focus on this conversation is how do we influence the budget at the approval stage? Let me see where Phyllis is, and then if I can have her in, it will be great.
That's great. You go ahead and do that, and I'll just applaud your comments, Adam. Say that
Okay.
that's a great example of an advocacy role that CSOs can play, is for advocating for more time in the budget calendar for CSO input at the formulation stage and the approval stage, but also advocating for a more independent PBO. So, you raised some really good comments there. I appreciate that.
Phyllis is logging on now, so let's accept her and then we can have. So Phyllis will talk to us about how they took off from a very humble point and then where they are now, talking specifically to the opportunities of CSOs making input through the Parliamentary Budget Office. I hope we'll have practical experiences shared from her end. And of course, knowing the challenges of the public service and Parliament, she would give us some hints as to how to navigate the political terrain. Okay, let's have a minute interacting. Is there something you would want to clarify from the submission so far while we wait for Phyllis to log in? Let's have a word from West Africa and one from East Africa and possibly from SADC. If we have that dispersal. Hello, can you all hear me?
I can hear you, Adams.
Yeah. I'm tempted to call Phyllis and we'll hear her by my phone if she's not getting it.
Or maybe we reschedule at this point because we've only 10 minutes left. And
10 minutes left. Yeah.
Yeah, we could also look at some maybe some questions from the participants at this point.
Okay. She says I should admit her. Okay. She's on now. Phyllis has joined it. Hello, Phyllis.
Hello. How are you?
Hello. Yes. Welcome, Phyllis.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I got delayed. My luggage got misplaced, so the timing was different.
No, thank you for.
That is ASCII for you.
That's ASCII for you. Anyway,
Yeah.
We're very grateful for your time, and then we want to invite your input at this point. Just as a background, we had Ryan Jimisa from Sierra Leone talk through the Parliament powers and responsibility in relation to the budget, and we had a breakout session where CSOs and ourselves discussed how they can engage. But we thought that having somebody who has dealt and engaged in the data and numbers crunching and supporting Parliament, share your experience of how CSOs can engage PPOs will be very enriching for their learning. So you're very welcome to join us now.
Thank you very much. I will not share any slides right away, but maybe I would give you a write-up much later. Just wanted to echo what I'm sure my friend from Sierra Leone must have said. The powers of Parliament are immense because no one can withdraw funds from consolidated fund or levy taxes on the people of a country without the authority of Parliament. And that is why Parliament plays a very major role. Now, Parliament has support from technical departments. You will find there what is called now parliamentary budget offices, the legislative budget offices, and sometimes there is what they call the research and other officers who really help them. Now, one way that the Parliament improves on Parliament is through efficiency, effectiveness, and promotion of transparency. So those particular technical departments can be a link to CSOs because the CSOs can actually help to do work related to specific areas that can actually be cannot be covered by those technical departments. And that deep analysis can be shared through either those budget officers or directly to committees with the parliamentarians. And that research is so important because we used it when we were in the budget office in Kenya. We would get different areas, health, infrastructure, and people would do that analysis, and then through us will come and make the presentation to members. And sometimes members actually accept more that work that has been done by the civil society, more than the internal, because the civil society will be forthright and they call everything as it is. Then there is the other issue of having to do some tracking of the expenditures, because budget, the continuous oversight is the most critical part, which legislature is expected to do. But that is normally the weak link of it. Civil society can do what we call tracking of expenditures and seeing effectiveness and whether those targeted actually get the benefits. And through that, that work by CSOs can actually be taken back to the parliament. And finally, some countries do what is called the alternative budget, which the civil society is actually the best who can actually offer some alternatives to what is being given in the budget. For example, sometimes the countries who do a program which is not very good, is detrimental to the citizenry, the civil society, because they are more nearer to the grassroots, can actually be able to work on those issues and bring them forth. So essentially, that is one of the critical areas that they do for that. I know you are strained of time, so I would like maybe if somebody has some question to ask the question, then I would be able to react to that.
Yes, if I can provoke a conversation about the budget consultation. I remember at some point when we were working with PBO in Kenya, you had budget consultation that engaged to get public input that led to the waiver of taxes on albinos on their medicine.
Yes.
Do you want to share that with the participants?
Yes, one of the ways that, you see, what Parliament does is one of the things that is normally encouraged is engagement with the citizenry on the budget proposal there is. So one time in our system, we had different interest groups who would bring their issues together, and they would actually document that they brought these issues to the authorities, and the authorities not included in the budget. At one time, we had the budget hearing by the budget committee. And for your information, in Kenya, the constitution provides that a committee of parliament will do public hearing on the budget. But even before that constitution, we still used to have a budget hearing, which would say that the budget has been submitted, but would like to hear the opinion of the public. So in this particular case, the people living with the albinism came to appear before the budget committee, and they came and brought their issue, which was that they needed cancer machines in hospital because they said because of the albinism case, they would easily catch cancer. So then we listened to them, and they gave us a budget of how much they would need to be given a free sunscreen for everybody who has that particular skin condition. And actually that was implemented as a policy, courtesy of public hearing and courtesy of civil society. One of the members who led that team actually later on became a member of parliament, and that's how that policy was actually included in the budgets. So sometimes that public hearing at the parliament level actually leads to the change in the way resources are being given. The other hand, there was the case of the PBO itself in Kenya. The PBO itself in Kenya was started by the push of the civil society. It was strengthened from the point of civil society. And that's why the PBO started on a grass where they had a lot of support from civil society. Yes.
Is there any clarification one would want to make? We have about 3 minutes to the end of the session, unless we have 15 minutes extension. So if any of you can jump in with a question, especially those of us in constrained environment like Ghana and Sierra Leone, how can we still take advantage of the PBO?
Hello? Now for Ghana, hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, for Ghana, there is not even Ghana. Let me just start with Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is that more advantageous positions, because in Sierra Leone you have a strong budget office, and I believe through that budget office you can be able to do some analysis and create a time to appear before the committees. I thought Sierra Leone has an opportunity to enter through that. Ghana does have an opportunity because the people who've been trying to set up a budget office actually are very close to the speaker's office. And I think they can be able to get an opportunity to appear before the committees and make presentation to the committees. Then the committees will be able to identify some of those issues. Ghana has a lot of information which is in the
Phyllis,
website. Yes.
The different. I know we are running for time, but let's still accommodate and speak slowly so that some people will catch up.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. What I'm saying is for Ghana, because the budget office will be trying to start it up with and they are members of the ANPBO organization. What Ghana needs to do is to ensure, because I understand they are trying to set up a fiscal council. It's very important to ensure that they understand what that fiscal council will do and what analysis can be done. And then the civil society still need to do some work, given the fact that in the website of the Ministry of Finance, a lot of data is actually logged in that website. So one can retrieve that data and do a lot of analysis, which then can become the entry point. And let me say this to civil society members who are attending here. If you don't use the information to analyze and then push your agenda, then the parliaments will never see what you're talking about. So you need to have an in-depth analysis. And sometimes the civil society, like in the case of Kenya, when we talk to them and tell them we want somebody to do an analysis on the cost of electricity, they would actually look for a real good expert on electricity and analysis, and actually do quite a bit of analysis. On second issue, we would use civil society to reach something like Pricewaterhouse to do for us analysis of the tax measures, and they would really make very good presentations. So you need to have that interest in ensuring that the quality analysis is also delivered, and not, there is what I like calling the activist kind of paper. That is actually the one loses ground. You need to do real good analysis that the government actually starts looking for that analysis.
Yes, I think Phyllis has just landed on the point I talked about much earlier, about strategic engagement based upon strength. Mm-hmm. I mentioned to our colleagues here, share the example of Ghana. Imani, Ghana or Africa engages the Ministry of Finance because it's strong on the numbers and global and all the trend, and they are able to provide that. Same Foundation engages on social sector budget information, data-driven, well-informed. And I can even talk about the fact that the CSO platform on oil and gas are so informed and organized around Ghana's performance over the year in the sector. So when it comes to the budget, they engage with information. And with that, Parliament doesn't throw you out. But if we go in and it's the sensational headlines, you don't have facts. And MPs are happy to do what they like best. When they don't have information, they like it most. They run away and close the question. So, we have been given 10 minutes extra. So let me stop here and invite anyone who can share with us or a question for Phyllis to further clarify how best we can tap into this evolving mechanism of PPO. Colleagues from Sierra Leone, how do you see the PPO there and how can you intervene? The background is that they don't have a lot of capacity now, but some of you have data, especially BAN. BAN is doing very effective work on budget issues. I know of the CSOs that are having a network across the country. Yes, John is asking to come. Let's have John now. John?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it's a very, very important aspect, as I said earlier. And we are trying, because the civil society landscape in Sierra Leone is a little bit very much strenuous on the part of those that are operating from the countryside, unlike those that are in the urban setting. So what we normally want to see happen, as my colleague was saying earlier, is for us to be more engaged. And this engagement can actually be feasible if we are very much strengthening in our capacity, because discussing these issues of public financial management and also budget processes, one needs to actually be grounded, as I said earlier. And the opportunity is all, and I think we want to really take advantage of that opportunity so we can liaise with and see how best we can actually assist greatly so that we don't just be very much focused on other issues and leaving out those important aspects to handle. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Can we have some input? Okay, Phyllis, do you have experience in the past, specifically how you created space to engage for your office to engage with CSOs? That in this case, you reaching out besides the community consultation I talked about. And what was the experience having CSOs come in and the challenges of them making their
Yes, we one way would be we would actually call those CSOs and ask them which area they like to do an analysis on the coming budget or any work they have done on the coming budget. And then after having a conversation, we would now give an official letter from the clerk of parliament to invite them to come and make a presentation during the budget hearing. Then there was the other way around. We would organize ourselves as PBO, a meeting where I would tell them, we want to disseminate to you also what we have analyzed of the budget so that you can also give us what is your opinion and you react to it. So we would give that particular thing. But remember that the law in Kenya, when we did it, we provided that whatever PBO will do, they have to disseminate to the public. And that was one good opportunity to ensure that we share and we also peer learn with the civil society, because some civil society are very good in the analysis of the budgets. They understand it much more than the PBOs, much more than the technical staff. So there is plenty of resource out there.
That is good information to share. Let's have Saraka come in. Your hand is up. Hello, Saraka. Saraka, please unmute and come in. Your hand is up. Okay. Saraka?
Oui,
Okay.
oui, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je voulais féliciter déjà tous les intervenants. Je suis Saraka Frédéric de la Côte d'Ivoire. Merci pour cette formation riche en informations et beaucoup d'enseignements. Moi, ma question, c'est de donner quel conseil vous pouvez donner à une organisation qui veut s'engager sur ce chemin-là. Parce que, bon, à ma connaissance, dans mon pays, la Côte d'Ivoire, on n'a pas de bureau, c'est-à-dire les OSC n'interagissent pas avec le Parlement dans l'élaboration du budget. Comment s'y prendre pour une organisation qui n'a jamais pratiqué cela pour la première fois? Comment on s'y prend? Merci.
Were you able to hear Saraka in the interpretation? I was able to hear his question. So if not, I can help interpret.
Please do that for us.
Okay, so Saraka was asking, or Frederick was asking, he said in his country there's not a tradition, there's no PBO, and there's no tradition of having having civil society scrutinize the budget. How can that be done? Like, what can the first step be for their organizations? This is a completely new thing for them. I just hope that Saraka can hear the response.
And let me talk briefly, and then Phyllis can come in. Here, we're thinking of how do we open Parliament up through the budget process without a PBO and without CSO advocacy platforms. It starts with working with change agents within the Parliament to speak for CSOs and the need for Parliament to be better informed. So let's identify change agents in the respective committees, and then you begin to start with that conversation. Another opportunity is to see how you work through the Minister of Finance. The Ghana PBO started when the current Speaker of Parliament was the majority leader in Ghana Parliament. And we started engaging actively to the point that Parliament and the Attorney General Department worked on a memo that got approval by the acceptance rather by the Minister of Finance. But it didn't happen. Unfortunately, when Balvin, the current speaker, moved from his role as a majority leader to the executive side as a minister. So that fell off the cracks until later there was momentum again. So the opportunity is when we change agents. In this case, we work with the current speaker of Ghana Parliament, who was institution-minded. But I recall also that in the case of Kenya, Phyllis worked with the Minister of Finance and certainly saw the need for Parliament and them to build relationships. So relationship matter between Parliament and the Minister of Finance. I'll stop here for Phyllis to come in with some experience of how CSOs can begin to push the envelope in their countries without PBO.
Yes. One is that I agree with Adam. The change agent is very critical. Then there is the issue of if the standing orders, that is the procedures that Parliament operates in. In most parliaments, those procedures create an opportunity to engage with the public. Actually, it's not called civil society, to engage with public. So looking at those standing orders, it's making the administration and parliament understand they need to call the public to come and present the issue on budget. That's one entry. The other one is relationship matter, like you said. Approaching the Ministry of Finance, working together with Ministry of Finance and getting an opportunity to be part of the public hearing is the other critical opportunity to go through. So creating the bridges is very, very critical. A bridge with the Parliament, the administrative part of it, and a bridge with the Ministry of Finance. And sometimes you'll find a politician who is so eager to push the case through, and those ones are the entry points to actually look for the public hearing so that the Parliament gets the information from the civil society. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Phyllis, for that addition. Jeff, do you have an input to make? Or anyone on the platform now? Hello. Okay. I would want to take this opportunity to encourage you to go and give your feedback on this session on the CSS platform. If you haven't received it, please let us know. We'll share it, but it is on the CS platform for this conversation. Okay, on that note, I think I want to thank Phyllis, our colleague and expert on public financial management, for really pushing hard to join us from just arriving from a trip, and to also thank the participants for your patience in allowing the extended time for this conversation. On that note, the recap we can provide based upon the recap was that CSOs needs capacity on how to engage. We also agree that strategic engagement, where there are no PBOs, is very crucial. But where there are PBOs, we leverage that mechanism to influence the budget process. We also had the experience of how committees can be engaged in the case of Ghana, but also in Sierra Leone, how we can work through the PBO, however limited the time, to influence the budget. On that note, I want to believe that it has been exciting and enriching engagement with all of you. And I would encourage us to reach out to other course participants that you know that are missing this opportunity, because there's a lot of learning going here, and I really appreciate and enjoy it so much. On that note, thank you everyone for your time, and do have a very good weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.